Let's go from one damn good guest to another. I see my man in the background, Dimitri Lascaris. How you doing, my man? You doing okay today?
Feeling relieved that this war is on pause in Iran, but
Yeah,
how you doing, Jamal?
I am. I am not relieved. I am not like I'm very angsty. Let me bring you in first. Dimitri Lascaris, he's a lawyer, journalist, and activist from Montreal, Quebec. In 2020, Dimitri ran for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. He is also host of where's the name of that show? It's
Reason to resist.
Risk. Thank you. Reason to resist. Usually the thing is in my head. I need to put the thing in the calendar. Usually I just remember it. Reason to resist. Check him out. He has a damn good show. I had the opportunity to look at some of the videos the other day. Fantastic work. Fantastic work. I am very angsty about stuff that's going on. Let me just say I am glad that Iran was able to beat back the night. The monster underestimated what it was going up against and trying to overthrow that government, because that's what it was trying to do. I don't. People should not get it twisted. This has nothing to do about nukes. This is everything to do about overthrowing a government that the U.S. has been looking at for the last 20-something years to try to overthrow. Taking rid of Syria or getting rid of Syria was their gateway to it. But they obviously haven't given up. And even when they did the quote-unquote ceasefire, Israel was still talking about attacking Iran during the ceasefire, pointing out that they murdered Nasrallah during a ceasefire, effectively saying the Ayatollah shouldn't feel safe. So, yeah, I'm very angsty about this. I don't believe for a moment that the U.S. has given up. They've filled Israel's coffers to the hilt with bombs and missiles as fast as they could give them weapons and whatnot. But on the other side of it, and I ask you this, do you think that Iran is going to be the death of Israel? I mean, they clearly seem to have bitten off more than they could chew with this. And Iran seems to have a pretty strong, resilient, apolitical system. And the people in that political system have become more fervently behind the government after seeing the U.S. effectively lie and attack them during negotiations. Give me your thoughts on that. What are your thoughts?
It's a complicated situation, Jamal. I think that the Israelis and the Trump administration are caught between fear and hubris right now, and I don't assume that they have a clear plan of how they're going to deal with the situation. They've seen that Iran can impose quite a severe cost upon Israel and U.S. military bases if it chooses to do so. It hasn't done that yet. And that they're pretty much defenseless to stop the Iranian ballistic missiles, particularly the more sophisticated ones. And by the way, let me just say about that, when I was in South Lebanon 5 times during the last 20 months, and I was in the occupied West Bank last March, I saw lots of structures that had been struck by Israeli missiles or bombs. And I'm no military expert, but I think it's important to understand exactly what the differences are between the munitions that Israel typically uses and those being used by Iran. So Israel is typically firing missiles from drones or warplanes that have a limited capacity to carry munitions. So, for example, there's no Israeli warplane that can carry these 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs that the U-2s reportedly dropped on Iran. And so while the cumulative effect of all of these munitions, because they've been given so many and they've fired so many into Gaza and Lebanon, is devastating, a single strike is not in and of itself particularly devastating. It could kill, dozens of people, but it's not going to wreck an entire neighborhood. Iran is firing these gigantic. When I was in Iran last month, we went to the aerospace museum or park, and we were given a tour by an Iranian brigadier general. And you stand beside these things, and they're gigantic. They look like, some of them look like NASA rockets. At the top of them, they have these massive warheads. And they travel at Mach 5, Mach 10, Mach 12, reportedly. So when a single missile strikes a densely populated or built up urban area, it can annihilate an entire block, an entire neighborhood easily. So the impact, both physically and psychologically upon the Israelis, I'm sure, has been quite severe. So to go back to the question, they know they can't deal with this threat. But on the other hand, I don't think they're going to stop either. So I've been asking myself the last couple of days, what is the most likely move on their part at this stage? I think
Same.
certainly they will conduct covert warfare against Iran. That's going to continue. Through proxies, agents of the Mossad inside Iran, people they've corrupted with bribery. They probably still have some capacity to do damage with drones that have already been smuggled into the country. But I think that the greater concern I have is that they're not going to be able to resist the temptation to attempt to assassinate Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. That's perfectly consistent with their prior behavior, and they may have deluded themselves into thinking that if only they can get him. Israel Katz, the psychopathic defense minister of Israel, admitted after the ceasefire was entered into that they had actually tried to kill Khamenei, and they failed. And I think in their own minds, they may think of this whole scheme to cause the collapse of the Islamic Republic failed only because we were not able to kill Khamenei. If only we can kill Khamenei. But these lunatics, if they do that, if they actually attempt it, or even worse, succeed, all hell is going to break loose. And it's not just going to be Iran. This is a figure of significant religious importance throughout the Muslim world, the Shia Muslim world in particular. Probably a lot of Sunni Muslims would be outraged by this as well. So at that point, I think all bets are off as to what would happen. The Middle East could very well explode in a conflagration of violence at that stage.
Yeah, not just the Middle East. Well, yeah, Pakistan may get involved, especially considering because I would imagine if you're a Muslim, something has to supersede this just kind of infighting. And Israel murdering the leader of, this faith in regards to this country just seems outlandish. It just seems outrageous. And you're right. Katz was like, we just didn't know where he was. But if we knew where he was, we would have taken a shot, which is mind-blowing. I don't think people realize how mind-blowing that is. This is a country or a colony of squatters of 8 million people who are committing a genocide, sitting here opining about murdering the leader of a country. And Iran is like, hey, you better be careful with that. We may decide to go after Benjamin Netanyahu. And from my point of view, why haven't you? I don't know why they have this restraint. I honestly, I don't. From my point of view, all of these people are targets. Katz is a target. Netanyahu is a target. Smotrich is a target. All of these people are fair game. Mm-hmm. It is a terrorist regime. Even if you need to, under your own laws, say we're perfectly fine with going after terrorists and we would show no compunction in killing terrorists. There you are. There's your targets. I have zero issue with this. I don't know why anyone has an issue with it, considering this is the rule set that Israel set themselves.
Well, they're terrorists with nukes. That's the problem. So I don't
Fair
know.
enough.
Yeah. So I don't know that the Islamic Republic would be showing this restraint if
they didn't have nukes.
Yeah, they didn't have nukes. And I'm sure they did try to kill senior military personnel. They not necessarily the prime minister, the defense minister, but they certainly went after the Mossad headquarters, the defense ministry.
Yes, they did.
Other vital assets of the military-industrial complex in Israel. And they probably did kill a few of these people. We're just not being told about it.
So you pointed out the capability of these weapons. This is probably one of my favorite videos. I call this the lights out video. Bam. You could see the speed relative to the other missiles that were coming down.
Just think about the kinetic energy of that missile. Just amazing.
I like I said, it's my favorite video.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make that a screensaver. That thing is like a light, and the lights just go out immediately as soon as it hits. And they were talking about like the damage that Haifa is not going to be operational until October. Tel Aviv, Jesus, is ruined in some respects. Like in some of those images, that place looks like Gaza. And from my understanding, Israeli media is pointing out that there are plenty of locations that are sensitive military installations that they have not disclosed that have gotten wrecked.
Well, yeah, the Nevatim Air Base is out in the Negev Desert, Jamal. So that was a prime target. I'm sure they struck that numerous times.
Yeah.
But it's entirely possible that we'll never know exactly what they did to it. But for sure, it took severe hits, and I'm sure that bases in the Golan Heights also got smashed.
See, I guess that's why I ask: Is this the thing that kills Israel? Because I agree with you; they're trapped between ego, while simultaneously knowing. Because they haven't, I don't see, it doesn't come across to me that they've acknowledged that they were beaten. And as opposed to accepting that reality, they're still like, we're going to go in again, with the knowing that the U.S. will follow them when they get into trouble. which is why I say I'm angsty. Because if Iran is not willing to keep going, and as you point out, both of these countries have nuclear power, nuclear weapons. Okay, so it's a restraint on some level because of both countries having nukes. So then the secondary question becomes, okay, well, what does Iran do? It seems like they've chosen the worst of both worlds. Not only, meaning you are saying we're going to refine uranium, but we're not going to get a bomb. Okay, so I understand why you're doing it. You're looking for some level of negotiating tactic. And you may even, this may bridge a gap. There may be a disagreement in the country on what you want to do. So this may be what you chose to do. But if you're not willing to get the bomb, then you're given a stalking course, pretext, like an argument that, they're trying to get nukes, whether you're trying to get nukes or not. Does that make sense? Like, it's a very weird placement.
Well, it's important, I think, to bear in mind that you have to enrich uranium simply to operate a civilian nuclear energy program.
Yes.
Uranium, and Iran has substantial uranium deposits itself. But in nature, as I understand it, uranium is not sufficiently refined in order to operate a civilian nuclear reactor. So you have to enrich to the level about, I think, 5%. Again, I'm not an expert in this regard. So they went to 60, but they went to 60 only after Trump tore up the JCPOA. And there are also non-military reasons to enrich well beyond 5%. If you want to have a medical research reactor, you need to get to at least 20%. And I understand that they even had a reactor that had uranium enriched for research purposes that was enriched to the level of 60% at some point in the history of their nuclear program. So, but yeah, I think the likely explanation for them going to 60% was to send a message to the West. They kind of put themselves in a situation of ambivalence where we could quickly get to a nuclear bomb if we wanted, so be careful, but we're not going to go there. I don't think that strategy has been successful. So it definitely didn't deter an attack. I think they would have been attacked. Yeah, they would have been attacked anyways. Even if they hadn't done it, they still would have been attacked. Right? They've been planning this out for decades.
It's a funny policy. That's all. It's like, we're going to create a deterrence by going to 60%, and we have a breakaway. And it's like, look, these guys are trying to get a nuke. No, we're not really trying to get a nuke. We're just having deterrence, just in case you attack us, and you get attacked anyway. And so now it becomes, okay, so now you're going to go for the nuke. Yeah, we don't know yet. Dude, what do you mean you don't know yet? You better go for that nuke. You better haul ass to get that nuke. Like, I am of mind that they should have already had a nuke. It was you were in a rough neighborhood with a maniac colony surrounded by enemies. But get that nuke. You better get that nuke. At least that was my point of view.
Yeah. We can't forget the fact that this is an Islamic republic. I think that the leadership of this country is deeply committed to the principles of Islam as they understand them. And Ali Khamenei has said that this is a weapon that kills civilians, and is therefore forbidden by Islamic principles. But I also understand this is also a subject matter in which I'm no expert, which is Islamic theology. But I also understand that there's a principle in Shia Muslim of adapting the canons of Islam to the circumstances. And so if circumstances change to a sufficient degree, Ali Khamenei, the Ayatollah, might well feel justified, consistently with his own religious convictions, in saying, well, we now need to have a nuclear weapon. And frankly, Jamal, I think you probably are in the same place as I am. It's like, what are you waiting for, man?
What are you waiting on? Get that nuke.
They're going to destroy you. They're going to keep trying. They will not stop. They're like the ever-ready bunny, the batteries that never run out of charge. They're just going to keep coming and coming. They're like that Chucky doll from that great Hollywood terror movie with the knife in his hand. They're just going to keep coming. So I mean, at some point you have to take the steps necessary to protect your nation.
You're telling our age, Dimitri. You're telling our age.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I agree with you. I got to be honest. Existence trumps religious law. From my point of view, call me a heretic. But your country needs to exist to practice any religion, first and foremost. And you are dealing with two nuclear powers, both of which are sociopaths, both of which are responsible for killing 400,000 people over the course of a year and a half. both responsible for knocking over governments in the Middle East, where all sorts of depravity have been used in those governments once they failed. Like, it's like you have to know where you are, from my point of view, but we'll see. I mean, like they say, either you take the Libyan model or the North Korean model, and I would hope that they go with the North Korean model. So we'll see. From where do you think this goes from here, though? I mean, let's take out Iran for a bit. U.S. and Israeli strategy. All right, your plan didn't work the first time. You've tried to overthrow this government. Okay, that didn't work. You're rearming as fast as you possibly can. The president doesn't read anything, so he's easily manipulated, can be manipulated into strikes. And in the same way that you've attacked him the first time around, and you got Trump to jump in, because I don't think Trump wanted his hands on it. I think they told Trump, Israel can handle it. And that wasn't the case. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, now what? Israel is saying we're going back in. And I think in their minds, they know as a flat fact that Donald Trump is not going to let his colony go belly up, in which case they know they can pull the US. And I'm saying pull from the context of Trump. The other people, you don't have to pull anywhere. They're perfectly willing to go. But I think they're going to chip their tooth on Iran in this. But correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong. I strongly suspect they're going to chip their tooth on this. And Iran can't keep having this tit for tats. At some point, they're going to have to not allow themselves to be pecked to death.
Yeah, I think the overwhelming likelihood is that this is going to get much worse. And it might not happen the next week, might not happen the next month, but sometime perhaps in the next 6 to 12 months, certainly not more time than that. I believe this is going to get much worse because these people are hell-bent on domination of the entire region, and they're capable, as you quite rightly pointed out, Jamal, of committing any atrocity, any satanic behavior, disgusting, monstrous, mind-blowing depravity that the human mind can conjure. It's just unbelievable. There's really nothing these people are incapable of doing. So any rational person looking at the situation would say, this is going to blow up. There's no way they're going to stop. So, and we shouldn't assume that they have a plan that actually makes any sense, that they have a strategy, but I do think they're going to come back at Iran. And as I say, I think it's going to start with, continued terrorist attacks within the country, continued attempts to decapitate the leadership of the country. And eventually this is going to lead to an Iranian retaliation. And Israel is going to be made to suffer to a far greater degree, and Trump is going to rush in. And by the way, I think one of the reasons why Trump is so desperate to convince people that he really did obliterate, Iran's nuclear program, just a fantasy. I don't care what happened to Fordo. He did not obliterate Iran's capacity to enrich uranium. And they probably saved the hundreds of kilograms or whatever it is of 60% enriched uranium. In any event, Trump will be he doesn't want people to think that it failed, because then he will be forced by his own maximalist rhetoric to attack Iran again, and he's not ready to do that. Right. One thing they might be doing, by the way, and I have no evidence to back this up, but one of the things they might be doing, these lunatics, is they might be transferring covertly air defense systems from Europe, and particularly Ukraine, to Israel, convincing themselves that, hey, if we just double the number of Patriot batteries we have in the country, we'll be able to protect the country from these hypersonic ballistic missiles. Whatever. They will come back, and eventually I think there is going to be a blow up, and it's going to be ugly. It's going to be absolutely ugly. And that, I think, is going to be potentially the death knell of the U.S. empire in West Asia.
Yeah, I agree with you, because I do think there's this kind of diversification of concerns where, okay, we're going to let Europe take over the Russian one, we're going to give Israel the Middle Eastern one, and we're going to take over China. But it hasn't worked that way in practice. I mean, for one, Europe can't carry that burden. They would get eaten alive by the Russians. Two, Israel couldn't carry that burden. They would get eaten alive by Iran. I mean, the U.S. had to literally jump in and bail them out. And the U.S. hasn't even been able to pivot to China. And obviously, at this point, with the industrial base that China has, China would eat the U.S. alive. The U.S. has to actually get forces over there, for one, and those forces would get taken under the water, meaning it would immediately go to a nuclear conflict. And there's no way to really win that. This plan doesn't seem to be working all that well. Like the Queen can only move once, like one time, like a move, right? Yeah. Like she may be a powerful piece, but she can't defend everybody at once. which is effectively the position that the U.S. seems to be in right now, trying to cover all of these bases at once. This plan doesn't seem to be working.
There's an implicit recognition on their part, I think, that it's not working in the decision that they've just made, these maniacs, to increase their military spending to 5% of GDP. It's like, my God.
Yeah.
You know, I did the math, actually, Jamal. And
by the way, in 10 years, just to point out, in 10 years,
it's 10 years. Yes, correct.
When Trump is probably dead in the grave. But good.
So there's that and something else. They're leaving themselves some wiggle room, because I think they understand this is going to be a Herculean task to raise military spending to that level. But let's suppose they were doing that today, that they were actually spending 5% of GDP. I did the math. I went to each NATO country. I looked at their 2024 GDP, multiplied it by 5%. It adds up to $2.46 trillion US a year.
Really?
Okay. Yes. Today in 2024 GDP figures. And the current military spending of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea is about $450 billion US. Okay, so that's less than 50% of current US military spending, and these maniacs are talking about taking it up to 2.46 trillion, or whatever it's going to be in 2035. You know, so I mean, what does that tell you? That tells you that they understand that they are woefully incapable of achieving their objectives. Of course, part of this is just we're going to enrich the military-industrial complex, so we need to keep Donald happy and all the rest of that. But
right.
But there is, I think, a sincere desire on the part of Europe to remilitarize, the leadership of Europe, because they know that they're very weak and they can't accomplish their hegemonic goals in the current state of things. But that's gonna bankrupt them. Whatever chess move they make is going to end up in them losing the match. You know, they simply don't have the financial and industrial capacity to dominate the non-Western world anymore.
You know, there's this other angle to that too. U.S. weaponry is expensive, and it's not that great. I mean, like, for all of this talk about the Patriot missiles or David's Arrow or whatever the hell they were using, Golden Dome, most of that stuff comes from the States. We supply them with many of these weapon systems. The Patriot system got schooled, and the new class of missiles that Iran was coming out with, they just couldn't touch them. I watched a missile get chased by a helicopter with one missile dodging through all of this air fire, bam, hit his target. And you think to yourself, okay, wow, that's humiliating in regards to your air defense. I've seen air defense batteries get taken out and then fire off after they get hit, basically taken out of commission. They are expensive weapons. And for the amount of, it's like, I think they were paying like $1 million or $3 million a missile for air defense or something like that. They fired 2 off, something to that effect. Whereas Iranian one missile might be $1 million. And so the amount that you're spending to defend is dramatically more than you're spending either for the drones or the missiles themselves. And the amount that they're producing is so minor in comparison to the amount that they use. I mean, they use 20 years worth within the course of 12 days? Okay, that's mind-blowing. That is a mind-blowing thing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how, and my point in this is, and where's Europe buying weapons from? They're not buying it from the Russians, they're buying it from America. So the US is like, we want you to put 5%, not because we want you to fight anybody, but because we want you to effectively buy our weapons. Mm-hmm. And we want you to buy our expensive weapons at that, which means the bang for the buck that you're going to get for those weapons, because they're so expensive, in comparison to Russia, who spends, $80 billion on the military, or China, who spends $200 billion on the military, and yet they're outproducing all of the West together in regards to artillery and some of these other weapon systems. That dog doesn't hunt. That just doesn't seem to be, I don't know. They're going to try it.
Well, that's part of the reason why they're doomed, is because of the structure of their military production industries. So the military production in the countries I just mentioned, Iran, China, North Korea, and the Russian Federation, are essentially state-owned.
Right.
So they're not charging a price that is going to result in fabulous profits for these production enterprises, right? But there's no impetus in the West to change the model of military production. They're absolutely determined to preserve the current model, which is they rely upon for-private, manufacturers who are gouging them. It's just insanely. The Auditor General in Canada just put out a report About a week before Mark Carney, Prime Minister Goldman Sachs, said we're going to spend 5% of our GDP by 2035 on the military, which said that there, of course, not surprising at all, that there are massive cost overruns in Canada's program to purchase F-35s from the United States. It's gone up by 50%, the cost, and at least 50%, and probably it's going to be 100 to 200% higher by the time that the damn things are actually delivered. And they don't even work well. The amount of maintenance you have to do on those F-35s to keep them in the air is stratospheric. I see no recognition in Western leadership that the whole way they arm themselves is fatally flawed and is going to bankrupt them. They're just going to continue with this model. Yeah,
they're capitalists. I mean, but they, even to their own detriment, they're capitalists. You would think that, okay, you need weapon systems that work, that are inexpensive, and that are functional for the environment to which you find yourself. And then they produce an F-35 that only works 50% of the time and was ungodly expensive in regards to the overruns for the cost of those planes. I don't get it. They just, maybe it's because they don't really believe that they're going to be in these conflicts. If you are the manufacturer, you want to sell a product. You don't really care about the war. You want to sell a product. And if it's expensive, if their cost overruns, oh well, we make more profit off of that particular product. How is it going to function in war? Yeah. It's not our responsibility. That's your responsibility. We just want the profit. I don't know. I thought that myself. You would think that a defense industry in-house would be more, beneficial, especially from the standpoint of cost, especially from the standpoint of functionality of what you need your systems. But
I think that's true of every single, this is kind of, I tend to have a view that anything that is important to the well-being of the people, so whether it's security, whether it's food production, whether it's medicines, healthcare, should be under the control of the public, the state. It should not be, we shouldn't trust capitalists to deliver the things that are essential for our well-being, because they're going to screw you over, man. That's all there is to it.
Agreed. I want to go to Russia for a bit. So Lugansk has been fully liberated. At the very least, that's what Russia is saying. They're screaming it out in their media. Lugansk fully liberated. And they should scream it out in their media. It's an accomplishment at this point. But I think, whereas Putin might have started this under this idea of, okay, we might be able to negotiate, even though they lied at Minsk, we may still be able to get a negotiation. I don't think that's where they are. I think they've gotten to the point, for example, this is Mark Rutte. Is it Rutte or Rutte? I think it's Mark Rutte.
I think it's Rutte.
It's Rutte. Okay. So NATO secretary, listen to what he says here, because and I'm going to ask you why is he saying this? I'm going to ask you why is he saying this? Keep in mind, Trump has been going with this farcical tale of trying to make a deal with the Russians, which I don't believe. Or at the very least, I think he wants to make a deal under the terms of a U.S. president, if that makes sense. Meaning, you're in a losing position trying to act as if you're not. And losers don't get to dictate terms. And Trump is trying to dictate terms, which means that there is no deal. But listen to what he is saying here. And I want to ask you, why is he saying this? Give me your take on why he's saying this.
All of this brings Ukraine closer to NATO. It's building the bridge. And it means that you can count on us now and in the future, so that you can defend yourself, that you are stronger at the negotiating table, that you can deter aggression in the future, and on your irreversible path into NATO. We support you now and throughout the challenges ahead. No one deserves peace more than Ukraine.
From the last Washington summit, I think it was 60 pages, 19 paragraphs. It will be considerably more condensed than that. And that means that you do not always have to repeat every sentence and every previous made commitment, because it stands. The strategic concept stands. The Washington communique stands. So the irreversible path of Ukraine into NATO is there. And it is my assumption that it is still there after the summit, whether it is again in the communique or not.
So I'm fascinated by that. Donald Trump is at least trying to pull this fig leaf out as if, nope, Ukraine is not going to be in NATO. Ukraine is not going to be in NATO. Ukraine is not going to be in NATO. And Europe, every opportunity is making a point. Even right there, he's like, look, just because we don't say it, doesn't mean that we're not inexorably moving in the direction of you being in NATO. Now, that was Colonel Daniel Davis on his channel playing the video. And he asked, why would they do this? They're obviously losing this war. Russia is clearly destroying Ukraine at this point. I have my idea as to why he's doing that, but I'm curious on why you think he's doing that.
Man, it's hard to say. I mean, I think probably they're so politically invested in Ukraine becoming a member of NATO that any acknowledgement, especially the European leaders, right? They've been saying since 2008, this is going to happen. Russia has no right to dictate. Ukraine is a sovereign state. We want them to be in. They deserve to be in. Blah, blah, blah. They're so politically invested that if they now reverse course, they will be completely discredited in the minds of the few Europeans who actually take these people seriously anymore. So it's like it'll be the destruction of the little credibility that remains to them, just because they're so politically invested. It's also a big part of the reason why they continue to send weapons to Ukraine, even though it's clear that Ukraine is getting crushed on the battlefield. Because if they stop sending weapons and they say Ukraine's lost, they will be utterly and completely discredited. They're going to keep this fantasy going for as long as they can. And, I think their hope is that they'll be able to pass this disaster off to some subsequent generation of political leadership in Europe after they've enjoyed all the fruits of being, members of the political elite. Their fancy summits, living in the castles like the Elysee Palace and, the champagne dinners and the private chefs and so forth. Once they've exhausted that, they're too old to enjoy those fruits of power. Then some other generation of political leadership will have to clean up the terrible mess they've left. That's the best that I can do to understand it. Otherwise, I can't make any sense of it, Jamal. I mean, what do you think? What possible reason? Who are they kidding?
I think this is about supremacy. I think for all intents and purposes, this is diversification of concerns with the U.S. Meaning, look, I agree with you. I do think there's this element of this question of what was it for? The moment that you have to acknowledge, okay, we got this wrong. The Russians won. That's kind of hard to kind of swallow. You have an organization that you've been building up for the last 50 years for the sole purpose of going after the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union goes belly up. Its beating heart remains. And you organize it to be against that, just the beating heart, and you get crushed by the remnants of the Soviet Union, not even the entirety of the Soviet Union. Okay, that's humiliating on so many levels. The other part to that, though, is, from my point of view, losing in Ukraine and having to give that up is effectively admitting that you have lost control as a global power. Meaning this hegemonic control of the globe goes belly up at that point. And I think they're willing to feed every Ukrainian into a wood chipper as they prepare themselves for a potential war and a conflict against Russia. Meaning it's almost like a delaying action. Like if you had to get your platoon out of a burning building or something, and you had to send 2 guys in order to hold off for a suicide mission. I think Ukraine is a suicide mission. I think Europe, however, what they don't quite get is that the U.S. will use them in the exact same way. That the U.S. will feed Europe into a wood chipper of Russians, basically a Russian wood chipper, every bit as much as Europe has been willing to feed Ukraine into a wood chipper of Russians. I don't think, in the same way that I don't think we care about Europe, I don't think Europe all that much cares about Ukraine. And so they would fight to the last dead Ukrainian with hopes that within 5 years, or however long they think Ukraine can last, that they will build up their military armaments during that time period. I think this is a fantasy. I don't think this war lasts for another year. I don't even think, definitely not 2 years, but I don't believe it lasts for another year. Nor do I believe that they're going to have their military, their industries and everything up in that year to quote unquote fight the Russians in the way that they seem to be gearing up for. I mean, at least, because otherwise I don't understand what's going on.
Oh, your interpretation seems to me to be an entirely reasonable one. That could explain exactly what's going on here. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. They don't give a damn about Ukrainians. The Europeans couldn't care less about the Ukrainians, the Americans, the Canadians, and I'm sure that, as you put it, would the Trump administration shed a tear over a few 100,000 Poles having to lay down their lives in order to continue some kind of NATO-led effort to wage war on Russia? No, they wouldn't give a damn. If Russia steamrolled over the Baltic Lilliputian Chihuahuas, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia, those Russophobes, would Washington shed a tear? Nah, look, Brussels couldn't care less. So sure, I think that your interpretation of what's going on here is very persuasive.
We want primacy. That's what we want. For all of this talk that Donald Trump makes about multipolar world, Donald Trump doesn't believe that stuff. I mean, he may say it, but Donald Trump also said he was negotiating in good faith with Iran. He said he was talking to Xi Jinping on the phone. Like Donald Trump says whatever he has to say to get from point A to point B. We want world supremacy. And if that means feeding or having the Russians and the Europeans fight in a war, we're okay with that. If that means having some kind of fight and conflict with China, we're okay with that. Like, meaning we're okay with setting countries on fire if it means that it holds them up in some particular way or fashion. And I think Europe thinks that it is the US's ally. That we don't think that way. We don't. I'm telling you, I live here. We don't think that way.
Yeah. I hope people understand what the import of what you're saying, because what it basically means is that Donald Trump is a neocon.
Yeah. Yes.
Neocon. Okay. So I hope we can finally dispense with this stupidity, which frankly sometimes I've seen in some segments of the alternative anti-imperialist media, people I respect, who bought into this notion that Donald Trump really was a peacemaker. I mean, if we can't, come to terms with the reality of who Donald Trump is now, then, we're never going to come to terms with it. The guy clearly is bent on U.S. global hegemony. He surrounded himself with people like that, people like Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth and Waltz and so forth, because they're like him.
Yes.
He didn't put them there because he was forced to. He put them there because they had the same vision, one of U.S. global hegemony. He's a dangerous, dangerous man. He's every bit as dangerous as Biden.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. Dimitri, man, I'm going to let you go. I've held you here for 45 minutes, and I appreciate your time. Absolutely. Well, one last thing. Where do you think this goes? I mean, do you think I'm right that from a Russian point of view at this point, it's unconditional surrender? Even if Mark Rutte is saying that just so Trump can't get any kind of deal, meaning to make sure that every deal is off the table because he keeps repeating it, and Russia's not going to accept anything under their guidelines since they were lied to before. Unconditional surrender. Is that the objective at this point?
The Russian objective? Absolutely. And I think the Russians are sophisticated enough not to call it that, right? They don't have to rub people's face in the dirt. They just want to win.
Medvedev was pretty clear. He
was
very clear.
That's true. Yeah. But Medvedev has a different rhetoric than that of the Russian president. But the president himself, and also I think this is true of the foreign minister Sergei Lavrov.
Yes.
They will try to dress this up in a way that the other side can live with it, because at the end of the day, victory is their goal, and not some kind of propaganda exercise. They want to actually win and bring the war to an end on terms that secure the Russian Federation's future. So anyways, it will be a capitulation. It will be a complete surrender. And I wouldn't be surprised if it happens this year.
Well, just to be clear, though, even when Russia wins this, there's going to be another 10-year guerrilla war. I think part of the reason, and the thing that Europe is looking at, is at the point where Russia takes all of Ukraine, that they're going to have intelligence, they're going to have terrorism, they're going to have all of that stuff in these occupied regions. I don't think for a moment that Europe is looking at it as Ukraine is lost and that's the end of it. I strongly suspect that they're just looking at a way of, let's say, bogging down the Russians into this kind of guerrilla war, especially in West Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe. That's a definite possibility, but let's look at what happened in Georgia, where they first tried this stunt in Georgia, right?
Yeah.
And the Russians crushed the Western proxy in that case, and then the country stabilized. And although there definitely is interference going on, and there's, they're trying to engineer another color revolution in Georgia, there really hasn't been a lot of political violence I think it's been more than a decade since then. So I think it could play out that way, but it really depends at the end of the day upon the sentiments of the people on the ground. They just put out a poll in Ukraine, which showed that I think a substantial majority of the population want the war to be ended on the current contact line.
Right.
So there's a level of war fatigue there. I think they may end up, people who remain in what constitutes Ukraine after the capitulation may simply be so sick and tired of war that they just want to live in peace with the Russian people. Let's hope that that's the way it goes. But sure, the West is going to want to continue to create problems there.
From your mouth to God's ears. From your mouth to God's ears. I just don't see this regime calling it quits anytime soon. But we'll see. I hope you're right. Dimitri, thank you for this, man. I always appreciate these conversations. I love your point of view. Dimitri Lascaris, he's a lawyer, journalist, activist from Montreal, Quebec. Dimitri ran for the Green Party leadership, the presidential campaign of the Green Party of Canada. And he hosts Reason to Resist. Definitely check him out. By the way, when is your next show? When do you air? 12? Is it 12?
Actually doing today at 1 p.m. Eastern time, a live stream with Laith Maroof.
Laith is fantastic.
Yeah, he is.
He's fantastic.
We always have great conversation. Thanks very much, Jamal.
Thanks, man. You have a good one, okay? Be safe.
How about you too?
All right. Well, shout out to Dimitri. Always appreciate him joining me. Always appreciate those conversations. Laith is another good guest. He's a fantastic guest. They should have a really good conversation. Definitely check them out. Reason to